Asia, Iran has released fresh visuals of its missile attack on Israel.
Today may have been one of the most dangerous moments in the Middle East in decades. Missiles flying across borders, world leaders issuing threats, and a conflict that could pull the United States, Israel, and Iran into a wider regional war. What began as tensions over Iran's nuclear program has now exploded into direct military strikes, retaliatory missile attacks, and warnings of regime change. But what exactly happened? How did the conflict escalate so quickly? And what did the leaders of the world say about it? Let's break down the full timeline of the Iran-Israel-United States confrontation. 2. What happened? Chronological timeline. Rising tensions before the war. For years, Israel and Iran have been bitter enemies. Israel has repeatedly accused Iran of trying to build nuclear weapons, while Iran says its nuclear program is peaceful. The United States has also been deeply involved, supporting Israel and placing heavy sanctions on Iran. Tensions grew even more intense after negotiations over Iran's nuclear program collapsed in early 2026. Israel warned that Iran's growing missile program and uranium enrichment posed an existential threat, and soon, those warnings turned into military action. February 28, 2026. Massive airstrikes begin. In the early hours of February 28th, Israel and the United States launched a massive coordinated strike on Iran. The operation targeted Iranian military bases, missile launch facilities, nuclear infrastructure, command centers in Tehran. More than 200 Israeli aircraft participated in the strikes, hitting dozens of targets across Iran. Explosions were reported across Tehran and other major cities. But the most shocking moment came when Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in one of the airstrikes targeting Iran's leadership. This single event changed everything. Within hours, Iran vowed revenge. Iran's retaliation. Iran responded with a wave of missile and drone attacks across the region. Iranian forces launched hundreds of missiles and drones toward Israeli territory, targeting major cities and military sites. Air raid sirens echoed across Israel as its missile defense systems attempted to intercept the incoming barrage. But the retaliation didn't stop there. Iran also targeted U.S. military bases in the Middle East, strategic infrastructure in the region, shipping routes near the Persian Gulf. At the same time, tensions began spreading across neighboring countries. Strait of Hormuz crisis. One of the most dangerous developments happened in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil shipping routes. Iran warned that vessels passing through the strait could be targeted. Several tankers were damaged, and global shipping was disrupted. Oil prices surged as the world feared a global energy crisis. This raised the possibility that the conflict could affect not only the Middle East, but the entire global economy. Israeli counterstrikes. Israel responded with further strikes inside Iran. Airstrikes targeted fuel storage sites and industrial facilities in Tehran, causing massive fires visible across the city. Israeli forces also expanded operations against Iranian-backed groups across the region. This included strikes against Hezbollah positions in Lebanon and suspected Iranian infrastructure. The conflict was no longer just between Israel and Iran. It was spreading across multiple fronts. 3 major statements from leaders. As the conflict escalated, world leaders began issuing strong statements. These statements revealed just how serious the situation had become. Israeli leadership. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made it clear that Israel would not back down.
I've made it clear time and again, Israel will never allow.
He said Israel would pursue the war with all our force. Netanyahu also warned that Israel had many surprises planned for Iran, signaling that more military operations could follow. According to Israeli officials, the goal was to remove what they see as a nuclear and missile threat from Iran. Some Israeli leaders even suggested the possibility of regime change in Tehran. Iran's response. Iran's leadership condemned the strikes and promised retaliation.
respond simply because their bases are in a friendly neighbor country.
Iranian officials warned that attacks on their country would bring severe consequences for both Israel and the United States. Hardline figures in Iran demanded continued resistance and revenge against Israeli and American forces. However, some Iranian leaders also attempted to reduce tensions with neighboring countries and avoid a broader regional war. This revealed divisions inside Iran's leadership. United States statement. The United States openly supported the military campaign. President Donald Trump described the operation as a major combat operation against Iran's regime. He warned that Iran would soon learn no one should challenge the strength of the United States armed forces. Trump also urged the Iranian people to rise up against their government after the strikes began. United Nations reaction. The United Nations quickly called an emergency meeting of the Security Council. UN officials warned that the conflict could destabilize the entire region and called for an immediate ceasefire. But with the major powers divided, diplomatic solutions remained uncertain. 4 global reactions. The conflict quickly became a global political crisis. Different countries responded in very different ways. United States. The United States fully backed Israel and expanded its military involvement. American forces conducted strikes on Iranian military infrastructure and nuclear facilities. However, public opinion inside the United States appeared divided, with many Americans worried about another long war in the Middle East. Russia. Russia criticized the strikes on Iran and warned that military escalation could destabilize global security. Russian officials called for negotiations and urged all sides to avoid further escalation. China. China also expressed concern about the conflict. Chinese leaders called for diplomatic solutions and warned that disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz could threaten global energy markets. China relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil, making the situation particularly serious for Beijing. European Union. European leaders urged restraint and called for an immediate return to diplomacy. The European Union also warned that further escalation could trigger a humanitarian crisis and massive refugee flows. Arab countries. Reactions in the Middle East were mixed. Some Gulf states quietly supported efforts to weaken Iran's military power. Others warned that the conflict could destabilize the entire region. Several countries also criticized the United States for not providing advance warning before launching strikes. 5. The human cost. As the conflict expanded, the human cost continued to grow. Reports suggested that more than 1,500 people were killed across Iran, Israel, and neighboring regions as fighting intensified. Thousands more were injured. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were displaced, especially in areas where missile strikes and air raids hit infrastructure and cities. Airports shut down, flights were canceled, and millions of people across the region lived under the threat of further attacks. 6. What happens next? Right now, the situation remains extremely volatile. Israel has promised further military operations. Iran continues to threaten retaliation, and the United States has warned that additional strikes could follow. Some experts believe the conflict could eventually lead to negotiations. Others fear it could expand into a much larger regional war, involving multiple countries and armed groups. And with tensions rising across the Middle East, the world is watching closely. 7. Closing cliffhanger. But what happened tonight may push the conflict into an entirely new phase. If more missile attacks continue, if the Strait of Hormuz closes completely, or if more countries become involved, this war could grow far beyond Israel and Iran. And the next few days may decide whether the region moves toward peace or toward an even larger war.